Well, Pope Francis's legacy as the first pontiff from Latin America takes on a special significance this weekend. During his Independence Mall address on Saturday, he celebrated America's history as a nation founded by immigrants in pursuit of religious freedom and spoke directly to the newest Americans.
Do not be discouraged by whatever challenges and hardships you face. I ask you not to forget, like those who came here before you, you bring many gifts to this nation. Please don't ever be ashamed of your traditions.
Joining me now from Philadelphia is Catholic journalist and commentator Austen Ivereigh. Austen is the author, most recently, of The Great Reformer, Francis and the Making of a Radical Pope. Austen, with a welcome to you. I know you were there yesterday for the speech, and I also noticed that you tweeted afterwards that you expect to see his words flying on banners for years to come. Austen, what specific words and what spoke most to you?
Alex, I thought this was an extraordinary speech, in fact, which may well come to be considered one of the defining speeches of this remarkable visit. What he did was he stood in the iconic place, of course, of American liberty and affirmed the very things which make America great, that struggle for the vindication of rights and so on. Then linked that to religious liberty, which is the key liberty, if you like, underpinning all other liberties, and then very deftly moved that onto the question of migrants' rights. And the link was this, because religious liberty is about the freedom of people to serve society according to their beliefs. And he was really saying to the migrant people of the United States, many of whom, of course, 11 million of whom are undocumented in the case of Hispanics, you need the right to be able to serve your society, to belong. And really, therefore, he was saying in words which are very easily be interpreted directly politically, that we need to turn strangers into citizens in order that they can fulfill the very things that America stands for. That's where I think the brilliance of the speech was.
So, Austen, how do you expect these words to turn into action and real policy? I mean, you say there's a political underpinning to them.
Yeah, look, there's a political underpinning to, in a way, almost everything the Pope has done ever since he arrived in Havana a week ago. But remember that the distinction is that the Church isn't about getting involved in specific policy debates. What the Church is really trying to do is to frame the values which underpin the discussion. And the whole question of immigration, the specific policies of how many people you let in and border control policy, the Church won't get into. But what they want the policymakers to understand is that these are human beings with faces, with stories, rather than numbers. In other words, what the Church is trying to do is to prevent the depersonalization of the immigrants in this question. And really what he was doing, and this is pure evangelization, he was holding up to people, in this case migrants, their innate, God-given, inalienable, to use the words, of course, of the Declaration, their inalienable dignity and rights as human beings, and then inviting them to, as it were, to become what he was offering them. And I was there, watching this speech, surrounded by Hispanic families with banners like "We are all immigrants," and I could just see the delight on their faces. This was a phenomenal affirmation. Now that's where you have the power to change. This is typical Pope Francis. He is giving to the people the dignity, the power for them to change their own situation. That's where I think the power of it.
Austen, almost every person that we've spoken with this week who's met Pope Francis has said that he or she asked them to pray for him. Rather, the Pope said, pray for me. What does he say with that message? What's the request about?
Long before he became Pope, this was in a way his signature. Everybody always remembers Cardinal Bergoglio saying to them, "Pray for me." Now, there are two ways of looking at it. The one is that he genuinely does believe in a very humble way that he needs people's prayers because he's a sinner, he's an ordinary human being like everybody else who needs the grace of God. But it's also a very, very clever way of ending, things. In other words, you always know when he says, "Pray for me," that's it, that's the end of the discussion. He's then moving on. So it's a very beautiful payoff line.
And your biography, it focuses a lot on his life before he was Pope Francis, before he was Cardinal too, in fact. What molded this reformer Pope Francis into the man he is today?
I think what emerges from his life story is a man with an almost total focus on the Gospels, on God's will, and in a way a desire to purge the church of everything that gets in the way of that. And I think it is that single-minded, I should say, focus, almost relentless. Every day getting up at 4 o'clock, spending at least 2 hours with the Gospels, really just absorbing the life of Jesus, and that incredible docility to what he regards as God's will and the Holy Spirit. That's really, I think, what shapes him. Of course, he's a very warm man who loves people. All that is absolutely what you see is what you get in the case of Pope Francis. But there's a part of him that you don't see, which is the very private man, the very austere man, the man who's a natural introvert, in fact, but whose openness to God's gifts always seems to give him what he needs for the occasion. And that capacity last night he did it twice in Cuba, just ignoring the written speech. He's in a spontaneous gathering and he wants to speak heart to heart. And he genuinely at that moment it is genuinely unscripted. Of course, he's saying things he said before, and yet he always says them in a different way because he really does rely on the Holy Spirit on those occasions. And I think that's really what defines the man. I would say courage, determination, resolution, austerity, focus, and a docility to the Holy Spirit.
All right, your insights are much appreciated, Austen Ivereigh. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.